he says he wants to come up with a way to stop the leaks. Back to you.
Mike Vaccaro, thank you very much. And as we have been indicating, the reports of the NSA's widespread reach ruffling feathers around the globe, and here to provide some insight on just how deep the problem goes, we're joined by Michael Vatis. He is the founding director of the National Infrastructure Protection Center at the FBI, and Tara Mahler. She is a research fellow at the New America Foundation. Michael, I'll begin with you. If these claims are true, do the risks outweigh the rewards?
Well, I think that's the question really the government has to be asking, and I think the White House is asking. You know, governments have spied on each other since time immemorial, and the question is, what's the point of spying on allies? Are we gaining enough intelligence that we can put to use to outweigh the costs that come diplomatically?
So then would you suggest that instead of asking, for instance, Angela Merkel about how upset she is about the U.S. spying on her, perhaps reporters should say, do you spy on the U.S.?
Well, you know, Germany, I think, probably doesn't do it a great deal. I think there are other allies. Israel has, had a long practice of spying on the U.S. There's the spy Jonathan Pollard that they've been trying to get out of U.S. prison for a long time. France also has been active in espionage against the United States. So, you know, those are two examples. Other countries, it's less clear whether they've had that history.
And Tara, we were talking earlier, this goes back to 1975, the Church Committee hearings. Back then, they found out 20 years later that the United States not only spied on its citizens, they actually gave drugs to one who committed suicide here in New York. Is history repeating itself?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Church Committee. So the Church Committee is what led to the Senate Intelligence Committee, which was supposed to be, governing the intelligence community and creating oversight for these sorts of matters. So I think what we're going to see right now is probably some sort of oversight in reaction to this, whether or not that's going to come domestically, internally in the United States, whether that might come from the UN. We have European countries now calling for the UN to take some actions on this. And we've also seen now over in Europe, they're trying to crack down on some of their privacy rules. So this might actually hurt U.S. companies over there like Google and Facebook, because there might be greater restrictions on access to information for the U.S. government for some of these companies overseas. So there might be backlash both in terms of privacy measures and also in terms of diplomacy with trade talks going on in Europe. The Brazilian visit that was canceled, and it's probably not a coincidence that some of these releases came corresponding to diplomatic visits. These leaks came, through newspapers over in Europe as Kerry was on his Middle East diplomacy trip there in Paris and Rome. So,
and as we pointed out in the 50s, they gave Frank Olson LSD. He committed suicide. You also said it was interesting to see how times have changed back then. What were they upset about then?
Well, it's interesting because in the Church Committee report, I remember one of the things was opening mails and reclosing mail. And now we're talking about, I think it's, hundreds, I'm not a computer scientist, but terabytes of data that are being collected and being analyzed by agencies like the NSA and the CIA. And this is purely, a technological development. So, part of the intelligence community's response has been that in order to get a grasp on all this data, they need to have it in a repository so that if and when at a later point in time they need to tap this information, they can go back in and do that.
Michael, are the reports of the disclosures far more damaging than what is being disclosed?
I think they're actually less damaging. Tara made an important point, and I think that is that the greatest cost is likely to be for U.S. industry. Angela Merkel and other European leaders have to be upset, have to show that they're upset now, mainly for their public, for their electorate. They've known that the U.S. engages in intelligence collection, including against allied governments, for a long time. But it's not something that they hold against the U.S. or say, we're not going to cooperate with you on Iran policy or Syria policy or on trade negotiations. They're certainly not going to cut off cooperation on counterterrorism measures. And those are the things being talked about now, but none of that's going to be real. U.S. companies, though, will face a harder time getting business. Cloud computer storage providers, internet providers may have a tougher time getting European customers because of the perception that they're in bed with the United States government.
And Tara, you maintain that the government says that there is so much information, your privacy is protected by volume. And I point out there are 6 billion textual records right now at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Nobody is going to go through any of those records, so all of the government secrets are hiding in plain sight. Does the government have a legitimate stance when it says this?
I think it is a good argument. You don't really see them making that argument as much publicly. They seem to be drawing on the need to protect Americans after 9/11 and prevent attacks. And that's the narrative they've been painting. But there's actually Gus Hunt, the chief technology officer at the CIA, has a great talk that's actually openly, publicly available online with slides, and it goes through all the numbers on the data, the amount of tweets that go out a day, the amount of emails that go out a day, the amount of text messages, phone calls. And once you start reading that, and you hear sort of the need to use this information, I mean, there's an argument to be made that there's just so much information. How will they be able to analyze it or do anything with it if they can't store it? So, I mean, the jury's still out, and there's privacy concerns, obviously, and I'm completely sympathetic to all of those, but I think that is one compelling argument they haven't really made publicly that they have been making in some of their speeches.
Yes or no, both of you, you're in the intelligence community. Do you speak on a cell phone?
I was in the intelligence community. Yeah, I speak on a cell phone, and I send emails all the time, obviously.
Sure, you know, it's a concession to reality of modern times. You have to speak on a cell phone. You have to use email, even if you know you're vulnerable to being spied on.
Tara Mahler, Michael Vatis, thank both of you so much for being with us this morning. Well, Detroit